It's time now for a look at today's newspapers with Gillian Joseph.
You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the Barrister and Futurist, Andrew Eborn, and the Guardian columnist, Zoe Williams. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Guardian reports on the US calling their airstrikes on Iran-linked militias just the start, following the deadly attack on 3 American troops a week ago. The Eye reveals that Chancellor Jeremy Hunt may boost defence spending in next month's budget to bolster the UK's firepower in the Red Sea. The Financial Times uncovers how Iranian petrochemical firms evaded US sanctions using UK front companies and banks like Lloyds and Santander. Both banks have said they're committed to complying with international sanctions. The Express front page covers the tragic death of Esther Martin, who was attacked by 2 dogs in Essex yesterday. Police are still working with experts to establish the breed of the dogs. The Mail leads on Brianna Jai's mother's plea for new laws to monitor children's online access after her daughter's murder last year. The front of the Times reports on the need for digital health accounts for NHS patients so that doctors can access their records no matter where they are in the country. Meanwhile, The Sun reports on an unnamed Premier League football star being the first to go to rehab for an addiction to laughing gas. And The Star reports that Britain will face 3 seasons of weather this week, with a warm spring blast set to be followed by heavy rain and snow. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Zoe Williams and Andrew Eborn. Welcome back to both of you. Let's start with the front page of The Eye. And the Chancellor predicted to increase the defence budget. Boost spending on defence, Zoe.
So this is from a military insider. It has sort of the hallmarks of a whisper story, really, because it's, you know, it's kind of, he's a safe bet. The language is very informal. There's nobody named. And so I would think it relatively certain that Jeremy Hunt wants this message out there, that he's prepared to boost spending. But I would think it relatively certain also that he knows that it's subject to a huge amount of kind of, you know, headwinds in terms of how much money he's got when it comes to the budget.
So is this sort of story, is this testing the water then, do you think?
I think so, probably, yeah. It's sort of trying to set it in much the same way as last week's stories about bringing back national conscription and the midweek stories about whether our young people were fit to fight a war. I think they're just getting into the discursive space, ideas around how much money we spend on defence, how much cuts have hit the military and how much we can actually do in the world with the military and the state that it's in, which is, by all accounts, not very much. So yeah, I would think it's open.
I think without doubt, you're drip feeding the story. You get it, the language of the streets, to sort of turn around and say, look, hang about, I promised I was going to try and do something in the next budget to give away tax and so on and so forth, reduce all of that. But there are other calls on the finances. And so if you drip feed this story in the standard sort of way of manipulating the media, if you like, you're working on that sort of basis, aren't you? So, as he said, he gets it. We need to do something about defence. You have appalling reports about various things not being fit for purpose on that sort of principle. We need to spend money to defend these isles.
So we read into this that it is probably likely to happen. It's just the sum that we're talking about, the actual figure.
And also, the thing is that the military has been... The voices in the military, if you just look at the interventions from former generals last week, have been massively emboldened by the fact that the foreign news is so pressing at the moment. You know, the possibility of a land war with Russia, the possibility of escalation in the Middle East, the fact that there is absolutely no day that I can remember when there hasn't been a foreign story on some front page, which you remember can go for quite a long time without that happening. And so you're getting a lot of kind of breaks off unfettered views from senior military figures in a way that you wouldn't have done when they weren't so newsworthy.
And absolutely, and he's going to get it on the NHS, he's going to get it on education, he's going to get it on protecting the borders. And I think you're going to get all of this language, and it's totally about preparing people for what's going to happen with the next budget.
And Zoe, it leads us on to, in terms of the military angle, to the Guardian, your paper, and the US saying that the airstrikes on Iran-linked militias are just the beginning, and this is the beginning of a sustained campaign, it seems.
And the intimation, but from the American statements, is that they are not ruling out a ground attack on Iran, which is quite massive, actually. It's extremely significant in terms of just the escalation. Because even though everybody always said that the Houthis were Iran-backed, and everybody always, maintained that the actions in the Red Sea couldn't have happened without Iran's implicit agreement, even if Iran wasn't directing them, it's a long way towards a wider conflict from there to launching strikes on Iran or, going in with ground forces. So I think rightly everybody is petrified.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And also not forgetting that in both countries it's election year, and Biden himself with Netanyahu said he wants it sort of sorted before the elections. So all of that's got to feed into the narrative and why certain things will be... But it is the language of war.
Yeah.
But we have heard, as we said before, from America that they are definitely not at war with Iran. And from all the soundings, we presume that Iran doesn't want a war. So both sides are going to keep well away from anything that verges on a full-blown war.
But they're not keeping that well... I mean, the US is not keeping that well away from it at the moment, and it's not keeping that well away from acts which will be seen, certainly in Tehran, as making it impossible for them to stay uninvolved. Now, it's been really interesting since October the 7th how little intervention there's been verbally from Iran. And in a way, the Houthis making their actions in the Red Sea contingent upon the cessation of hostility in Gaza, it's sort of the closest that that anybody has wanted to come to yoking the wider situation with Israel and Gaza.
And we've just got in the latest pictures of that US attack last night. This is from US Central Command. They were saying these are just released of that attack, which they are saying isn't an escalation, but...
Yeah. They're so careful, well, trying to be so careful with the language to emphasise it's not escalation, because they want to say, look, we've got to be very targeted and so on and so forth. We're not going to let certain things happen, but we have to...
But how can it be seen as anything but?
And I think you're absolutely right, and that's the problem. And this is why they're dancing around it without sort of doing the connections that we spoke about previously to say, this is the reason for it, this is where the support lies, and so on and so forth. But you're right, it's a very dangerous and precarious position.
And I think as well there's the territorial issue that targeted strikes against the Houthis, if you even accept the phrase targeted strikes anymore, because they never don't catch anybody except those people. You're not just talking Yemen, but also Syria and Iraq so far. And you cannot, since it's not a state actor, there's no demand on the Houthis to be based in a single state, but it means to do a targeted attack upon them. You're threatening the sovereignty of multiple states at once. And that is extremely dangerous, which surely has occurred to Biden.
Yes.
Let's move on. Rishi Sunak is in Northern Ireland this evening, visiting the newly reinstated Stormont sitting tomorrow for the first time again since Saturday. What do you think will be on the agenda, and how much, we were discussing with David Blevins before, our correspondent, how much credit Rishi Sunak will take for power sharing being finally restored during his tenure?
It's certainly had the edge taken off it, his visit, by the election of the leader of Sinn Féin, Michelle O'Neill, because as this story says, the former Tory and Labour Defence secretaries have produced this report for a think tank Policy Exchange, saying that the Sinn Féin's Anglophobia is at odds with the UK's long-term strategic interests. So Sunak is either going to have to take that head on or not, and either way, it's going to be extremely sticky. But it's extraordinary because, that's democracy for you. There's no call upon the voters to observe and respect Sunak's long-term strategic interests.
And it can't be a surprise when they turn around and say there's going to be no friends to the UK. I mean, that's not a surprise for people, is it?
It's not a surprise, but it certainly will take the gloss off. And I wonder whether he thinks of himself as making a kind of diplomatic mission to at least, you know, maintain relations as cordial as they are up till now, which is not always cordial, or whether he's arriving in a kind of spirit of challenge, stop talking about unification and start talking about reunification and start talking about making things work post-Brexit.
Well, he was quite touchy when he was asked about that today, about Irish unity. It clearly wasn't something that he wanted to talk about, but Michelle O'Neill does.
I know, you're absolutely right. But I think, to your point as well, in an election year, he wants to find whatever victories he can.
I know.
And this is going to be a difficult one. He's going to say he's got them back.
I mean, just about the only thing he's got going for him is that public opinion actually currently isn't with a referendum on reunification. And I think the reason it isn't is because they looked at what happened with Brexit and thought that looks hideous. You know, because there was, previous to Brexit, there was the public support for at least considering the question was actually somewhat higher, I think, for a while. But the constitutional entanglements have taken a terrible bad name since in the past 8 years because of the nightmare we've had.
You're absolutely right. It'd be interesting to see how the story is spun, because it's much better to say he's going to make no ground and then make some, because then he'll get a victory. But I think he's going to be looking for those victories, and some are going to be hard to find.
But you are right, Zoe. Referendum has become a very dirty
such a dirty word.
Just going to end on this story regarding Brianna Jai's mother speaking following the murder of her daughter, and about her suggestions for limiting phones for under 16. She's also reaching out to the parents of her daughter's killers and is saying that she's prepared to speak to them.
Absolutely. I mean, an incredible interview that she gave this morning, and it heart breaks. And the compassion that she showed, not just for the parents of the murderers, because they've also, she said, have lost a child. What she's calling for, there's already certain protections in place. We've got the Online Safety Act, which puts obligations on social media companies. They can get fined up to 10% of their global turnover if they don't enforce their terms and conditions. There are already restrictions about WhatsApp. You can't have a WhatsApp until you're 16. According to their terms and conditions, you can't have social media till you're 13. The point is, however, that it didn't come from traditional social media. It came from searching the dark web. That's where these appalling videos were. And the dark web is basically, it's encrypted end-to-end, so they can't see what people are doing. And as a result of it, there's all sorts of awful things there. We need to look at that as a wider picture. But there are special phones that can be limited. They're already on the market. And I think it's an obligation on everybody, on the parents, on the schools, on the social media company, to work together to address this.
OK, Andrew and Zoe, we're going to leave it there because we have run out of time before the break coming up. When we do come back, could you soon be able to access your GP records no matter where you are or which doctor you're seeing? We'll discuss that next. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Andrew Eborn and Zoe Williams. We're going to have a look at the times in this section and this digital access to GP records. But I thought that's what the NHS app was about already, which exists now.
Part of it needs to be connected because information is power. And at the moment, a lot of that it's very disjointed. And as a result of it, it's not just also about the personal information, but the wider implication. If you take things like the BRCA gene, for example, if you know that a family member had a problem and that's not shared, then people have lost their lives as a result of it. So information is power. So prevention is better than cure.
So would that sort of information be
all of that
shared
sort of stuff
within
should be shared on that sort of basis, yes. So, but what you have to do, and it's interesting because GPs, they're saying that at the moment it's about empowering things like artificial intelligence. The more information that you have, the more that you're going to be able to tackle diseases and so on and so forth. And if you can share that on a worldwide basis, and then basically every GP could have access to it on the computer and therefore treat the person in front of them. And there's a few organisations, things like Science with Soul, are looking at that. I know there's Caroline's Law, where they're trying to talk about the BRCA gene and make family members aware of the risk as a result of it. Information is power and prevention is better than cure.
I think the problem is that the potential for... It's extremely serious. Any data breach is serious,
Yes.
right? And a huge amount of data breaches have very serious consequences for, you know, commercially, since GDPR and all the rest of it. But a breach in the confidentiality of your patient records is so grave and has such potentially serious consequences that you're starting from the position that the IT has to be really hot. And I think that's probably what the NHS is dragging its feet on, because we you know, it's really difficult. If you just look at the number of things that have been hacked, from the British Library to the Guardian, the IT system, which is completely resilient to any kind of attack, it hasn't yet been shown to exist, you know, including the Pentagon.
Yeah.
So you always have to balance this against, is there no criminal mind in the world who could get into it? And the answer is probably always no.
But does that mean that it shouldn't be pursued, though, because there might be flaws in the system
Not
when it could have really beneficial...
Yeah, I think you're right. What you need to do is make sure that security is getting tighter all the time.
Yeah.
AI will help with that as well. They're dealing with those sort of things about cyber attacks and so on and so forth. Data is so valuable, but also this is saving lives. And I think the more that we can get this joined up, the more we can have access. As I say, prevention is better than cure, and information, data is all part of that.
They're talking about patient passports, aren't they? As the way
Exactly, so
forward.
you can go anywhere and be connected.
Let us move on to the I. 1 in 4 UK voters like Trump.
I actually felt quite cheered up by this, right? Because if 1 in 4 of them like Trump, that means...
Oh, yes, 3 out of 4, three-quarters don't.
Three-quarters don't. But also, if you think about Trump and how chummy he is with Farage, and how the Conservative Party, even Theresa May, really sucked up to him a lot.
Did she?
Yeah, don't you remember her holding his hand on the way up the stairs?
I think he tried to hold hers. He was very touchy-feely with everybody, wasn't he?
If Donald Trump tried to hold my hand up some stairs, I swear to God,
is that right?
It would not go long enough to get a photo of it. So, you know, I'm taking this as a resounding rejection of the entire right wing.
People like characters in politics in the same way as Boris used to be the Prime Minister he was a Carlsberg, wasn't he? He could appeal to electorate that other politicians couldn't. He then became the Marmite figure, and I think that's the problem. What's happened, though? People like these colourful characters, and I think Trump has worked on that sort of basis. So he appeals to people. When we have a lot of vanilla-type characters, I think Trump's going to be there. But you're right.
But he has done some overly colourful things.
You're absolutely right. And some of the stuff is quite extraordinary.
Thank
which is
you,
why
Julian,
it's 1
for
in
that
4.
diplomatic, overly colourful.
He is an incredible character, and he will turn it to his favour. And the more that you throw at him, the more his popularity increases.
Not really.
Well, it does in the States, doesn't it? Just very quickly, staying with Trump, he thinks he looks like Elvis.
He loves Elvis, and so what he's been saying on Truth Social, he says, people often say that I look like Elvis Presley, and he's done this glorious picture, which I think we can see here, with the 77-year-old Trump next to a picture of Elvis. And
he's not unlike him.
He's not unlike him.
No, but I think this is a very idealised picture of Donald Trump. That doesn't look like the Donald Trump that I...
You think it's a deep fake? That's
a whole other story.
A lot of shaving off the angles.
This is when he's about 70, though, apparently.
77. He's 77 in this picture.
But this is when he was about 70.
Yeah.
So well, there you go. Trump as Elvis. Thank you very much for taking us through the papers.